None of the evidence adds up, and the conspiracy theories are piling up. Follow me down the rabbit hole about John F. Kennedy's assassination. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we're talking about John F. Kennedy's assassination. We are finally finishing. I'm finally finishing. It's been, I guess, 3 parts really, because we had the Lyndon Johnson part, then we have John F. Kennedy and like all the history behind him and Lee Harvey Oswald, and then now today we're talking about all the conspiracy theories behind the assassination because nothing makes sense, which is why people like us question it, right? I also want to apologize for my voice. I'm a little congested, but we're gonna get through it. Let's get into it because this is gonna be a long episode, I think, but there's just so much behind this. So we're just going to dive right in. So basically, right off the bat, about 52% of America didn't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the main culprit of JFK's assassination. They didn't know if he was involved or if he just wasn't involved at all. He was just a patsy. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And this was right away. So it wasn't like the government did a really good job to begin with, saying like, oh, look, Lee Harvey Oswald killed the president and he's dead now, so convenient. That wrapped up in a cute little bow. No, like nobody really believed the whole situation to begin with. And evidence quickly emerged, which cast doubt basically over the whole thing because all the evidence was not really working out in their favor that Lee Harvey Oswald either did it at all or did it alone. There was just too much going on. So the Texas School Book Depository was behind Kennedy at the time of the assassination. So all of the bullets that should have hit him from Lee Harvey Oswald, if we're going with that theory, would have had to come from behind Kennedy. And we've got lots of witnesses saying that they heard shots coming from other directions. And I know that this isn't like really a smoking gun because sometimes it's really hard to determine which way shots are coming from when you're just like out in the open. So yes, we're going to take that with a grain of salt, but there's so much evidence that indicates that maybe shots did come from a different place, right? Medical staff would consider the shot that killed Kennedy or that hit Kennedy's throat to be an entrance wound, not an exit wound. And in a press conference given just after Kennedy's death, Dr. Malcolm Petty said, quote, "The wound appeared to be an entrance wound from the front of the throat," end quote. And if the shot had come from the schoolbook depository, it would have to be an exit wound, right? Like it doesn't make sense that would be an entrance wound. However, the head wound entrance is from the back of the head. So you got wound entrance from the back of the head, you got a wound entrance from the front of the head. You got entrances from all over the place. It's not making any sense. So early on, this evidence of gunfire from the front was reported by the media. Like basically right away they're like, "Oh yeah, some of the shots came from the front." However, it didn't take long for them to settle on Oswald being a lone gunman and that all the shots had to come from the back. But also, for a second, can we just talk about the convenience of all this evidence, or quote unquote evidence? Because you have like these witnesses that apparently happen to just look up and see a person in the 6-story window of the depository right at the perfect time, which is interesting in itself because you would think everyone would be so interested in the president and first lady in front of them and their governor and the governor's wife literally in front of them in a motorcade that they're not really paying attention to all the boring buildings around them. Like it doesn't make any sense. You just happen to have people like looking up and they take note that somebody is actively in that window. Like, unless they're being super shady, which if you're about to shoot the president, you're not trying to be super shady, you're trying to hide, right? I don't know. It just seems really convenient. And also, they just happened to find 3 spent shell casings and a rifle that belonged to Oswald in the exact place where exactly it should be. Like, I don't know. It seems odd, right? So, you're telling me that Oswald was smart enough to plan the assassination of the president, or at least carry out like a plan to assassinate the president, but not smart enough to clean up after himself so he wouldn't be caught. Okay. Okay. But also, Oswald, he wasn't like a great shot to begin with. So, yes, he was in the Marine Corps and he did get weapons training while he was there, of course, right? He was a sharpshooter. He got a sharpshooter designation when he first entered the Marines, but he took another test and he dropped down to marksmanship, like to just a marksman. So I don't know if this is how it works in the Marines. I know in the Navy, marksman is like you passed, you're good enough, you're not great, you're passing. Sharpshooter, you're doing much better. It's like an intermediate level shooter, and then expert is obviously like expert level, you're fantastic. But for you to like enter the Marines as a sharpshooter and then get worse at shooting and only get a marksman the next time you take a shooting test, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, it makes sense that that would happen. It doesn't make sense that this man who couldn't pass, or like was barely passing the shooting test in the military, is going to carry out this type of assassination. To accomplish the task that he did, shooting Kennedy in the neck and head and hitting the governor in the arm and the chest and all that, it would have taken a lot of skill and precision because he is shooting from a distance away at a downward angle while the car is moving. Like, this is not like an easy shot. This is not something that you're just like lining up 5 yards away, boom, you shoot it. Anybody can hit a target then, right? This is a precision shot. Okay, but don't get me wrong. He could have practiced in the years between his military service and the assassination, but still, that's a tough shot. Like, that's going to take a lot of practice. A lot of practice. And the rifle that was found in the depository was tested by the Army and the FBI and found to be in really poor condition. It didn't aim accurately. And even like a skilled marksman, like somebody very fast and very good at shooting, the fastest they could shoot multiple bullets is 2.3 seconds. But all the shots that were fired by Oswald would have had to happen in 6 seconds. So the timing just doesn't make any sense. But I think everyone kind of knew that things weren't really adding up and making sense. So there were internal memos and recordings that have surfaced now that show just how fast it was decided that it had to be a lone gunman, and that had to be the story. That we had to convince the public that it was a lone gunman, right? Because any other story, it's not going to do. This has to be the story. So in a memo from Nicholas Katzenbach, the Deputy Attorney General, sent to Bill Moyers, who was an assistant to President Johnson, basically it confirmed this. The memo says, quote, "The public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, that he did not have Confederates who are still at large, and that the evidence was such that he would have been convicted at trial. Speculation about Oswald's motivation ought to be cut off, and we should have some basis for rebutting thought that this was a communist conspiracy, or, as the Iron Curtain Press is saying, a right-wing conspiracy to blame it on the communists. Unfortunately, the facts on Oswald seem about too pat, too obvious. Marxist, Cuban, Russian wife, etc. The Dallas police have put out statements on the communist conspiracy theory, and it was they who were in charge when he was shot and thus silenced. The matter has been handled thus far with neither dignity nor conviction. Facts have been mixed with rumor and speculation. We can scarcely let the world see us totally in the image of the Dallas police when the president is murdered." End quote. He went on to say that they need to release the FBI report on Oswald and the assassination, and he also suggested that they put together a commission to review and examine all the evidence and like announce a conclusion. Basically, they're like, hurry up and put out the FBI report, whatever the FBI said, and then we'll also make the public feel really nice and warm and fuzzy. We'll put together a commission and give everybody the answer that they're looking for, right? That's where we got the Warren Commission, because nothing says truth like a committee of officials telling you what to believe. But the Warren Commission's job, basically the entire job, was to convince the public that Oswald was the lone shooter. So whatever evidence they gathered, that had to be the conclusion, because that was what the president wanted at the time, Johnson. That was what everybody was like, yep, this is what it has to be. So you put together the evidence that makes this the right answer. The Warren report came out in September of 1964, so almost a year later, which makes sense. They have to do all their reporting. And of the people that investigated the report's initial volume and supplementary volumes, they realized the conclusions either like they weren't strongly supported by the evidence or they actively contradicted the evidence. So not very many people actually dug in to the Warren report, but the people that did, they were like, this is stupid. This doesn't make any sense. All the evidence is like upside down and backwards to what you're saying the answer is, which is that Oswald is the lone gunman. But that's what they wanted us to believe. That's what they needed the American public to believe. And they didn't. The American public just didn't. Still doesn't. So the Warren report needed to prove that all the shots could have come from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. That had to be one of the things that they proved, right? So there are witnesses that heard shots coming from the building and saw gunmen on one of the upper floors. But the autopsy doesn't fully support this narrative. The autopsy claimed that there was an entry wound low down on the back of Kennedy's head, and there was a large wound towards the top right rear side of the skull. These locations of the supposed exit wounds are higher than the entry wound, which doesn't support the fact that the shot was supposed to be coming down at Kennedy. This almost suggests that the shots were coming up towards him. And in the autopsy, they determined that the bullets that caused the damage were different bullets, like different types of bullets. So you have at least 2 different types. Most of the head damage appears to be caused by a soft-nosed bullet, which is like a regular like hunting bullet, whereas like the non-fatal wounds, so the neck wound and the governor's arm and body wounds, were caused by full metal jacket bullets. All the bullets that came from the rifle in the depository were all the same type of bullet because they all came from the same case, they were the same batch, they were the same everything. We also see that the head movement doesn't match what it should be doing if the shots came from the depository. So in the video, which is most of the time when I'm referring to a video in this episode, it's the Zapruder film. That's the one that is mostly referred to in all the things. There's probably like 4 or 5 videos I think they got from different people that day, but that one was like the most clear and had the best angle vantage point of everything that happened. But in his film, you can see very, very clearly when Kennedy gets shot, his head flies backwards and then it bounces off the seat and then it falls forward. So they tried to say like if, like, I don't know, it fell forward and then went backwards or whatever. But the law of physics is saying that when this bullet's coming at you, your head's going to fly in the same direction the bullet's coming from. So if his head is flying backwards, that means that the bullet had to come from in front of him. And we also see Jackie Kennedy basically like trying to climb out the back of the car. She's like climbing over the back of the trunk of the car. It almost looks like she's trying to get out. And when asked like why she was doing this, basically it was explained that she was trying to gather the pieces of Jack's head that had like flown off and was all over the back, which again would support the fact that the bullet came from the front of him if the pieces of his brain are flying out the back. But also when fight or flight kicks in, you're gonna do something, like you're gonna try to preserve yourself. Your first instinct isn't, I need to grab my husband's head that's flying all over the back of the car. That's almost nobody's first instinct. Most people's first instinct is to like get out of the way, hide. So why is she climbing out the back? And then obviously she gets in the car because her Secret Service agent jumps over the back and like gets her in the car. But I don't know. It seems a little odd that the explanation's like, oh, she's just gathering the pieces of his head that are flying away. And the Secret Service agent in the YouTube that I watched, he was like, no, she actually grabbed some pieces too. But that just, I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about, like, my husband just got shot multiple times, and now I'm just gonna gather his brain in my hands really fast.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's the letter E, the letter Z, melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way. Menopausal and perimenopausal women, listen up. It's time to take control of your health and comfort, and Winona is here to help. Winona is a telemedicine company for menopause care who believes that your symptoms are real, important, and deserve to be taken seriously. And for many women, this starts with hormone replacement therapy. Winona's HRT is made with plant-based, bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic ones, so it better aligns with your body to offer relief from hot flashes, weight gain, and other uncomfortable symptoms. 80% of women who use Winona find relief within just 90 days. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today. Visit buywinona.com today to start your free visit. With free shipping and the ability to pause or cancel at any time, your path to wellness has zero obligations. Use code SPRING24 at buywinona.com for 25% off your first treatment plan. That's BYWINONA.com for 25% off. Winona. Menopause care made easy.
But back to the person being in the window, or like somebody being in the 6th floor, there are home videos that had spanned over the 6th floor, like the depository, just like because they were looking for Kennedy, um, at different times. And there's nobody seen in the window on the 6th floor. In these same videos, though, you can see people on the 5th floor, and these are people that have been like proven to be watching or like waiting for the president to pass, like to watch the president. But there's no one in the 6th floor window at all. And there are several videos that show this. One of the videos shows the depository right when Kennedy was supposed to pass, because I guess he passed like I don't remember if it was 6 or 9 minutes later. Like the motorcade was late. Whatever. You're waiting on the president and the first lady, right? But at the time it was supposed to pass, this person had spanned over to the depository and nobody was in the 6th window. And then I think the second video that showed when Kennedy was actually passing, it was like 15 seconds before he was passing that the video, or 15 or 30 seconds, that the video had spanned over the depository and still no one was in the window at all on the 6th floor. So the Warren report also needed to prove that Oswald was on the 6th floor with a rifle. So first of all, the bullets need to come from the 6th floor. Secondly, Oswald had to be there, be the one shooting the rifle. Oswald was confirmed to have a paper bag with him the day of the shooting. We talked about this last week. So he claimed that there was curtain rods in this bag. Fine, whatever. But a couple people had seen him with the bag and say that the bag was much too short to actually have a rifle in it. And there was also a witness to Oswald entering the depository, and that person said they didn't see Oswald with anything in his hands at all, like when he got to work that morning. That leads me to believe that maybe he could have left this paper bag in Wesley Fraser's car. So, if you remember from last week, Oswald didn't drive himself. He got a ride every day because he didn't drive. So he rode to and from work with Fraser. if he's going to ride to and from work, and he was in Wesley Frazier's car, who was one of the witnesses that said he saw the paper bag that morning, but then the next witness who saw Oswald entering the building didn't see him with anything in his hands, he must have just left it in the car so he could take it home later. If it was curtain rods, that makes the most sense. If it was a disassembled rifle, well, maybe he was going to go back out and get it. Who knows? But the police said they found a paper bag on the 6th floor that was long enough to have fit a rifle in it. And there are many things wrong with this bag theory, though. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Firstly, the witnesses that had seen the bag Oswald had said that the bag the police found was much longer. So it wasn't the same bag. Secondly, the bag they found didn't have any like creases or oil stains or anything, which every gun is oiled, and especially if it's disassembled, which they say the rifle was disassembled in the bag, you definitely would have gotten oil stains or something on the bag. And if you're carrying a bag throughout the day, a paper bag, it's going to get creases in it. Like, that just happens. And with anything inside, it's definitely getting creases. Thirdly, this bag that they supposedly found probably wasn't even at the crime scene. It's not in any of the crime scene photos, and the testimony given by the police officers who supposedly found this bag wasn't very convincing. They like kind of stuttered through it, and they were like, "Yeah, it was there. We saw it." It wasn't super convincing that this happened at all. Lastly, the bag was assembled using depository materials because, again, you're at a school book depository. They're probably wrapping school books in paper bags. But Oswald didn't have access to the building's wrapping table, so he couldn't have made this bag or assembled this bag. And anyway, he couldn't get to that table with all the wrapping material. So that just seems like they're just creating evidence to make their theory work. They say that Oswald wasn't seen until 90 seconds after the last gunfire, which is why he had to have been the shooter, right? But we talked about this a little bit in the first episode. He wasn't out of breath when he was seen. And if he had been on the 6th floor and then ran down to the 2nd floor after he had put, all his guns and all his material away, which the 2nd floor is where he was spotted, he would have been out of breath at the very least. So, yeah, he wasn't seen, but he could have been doing a number of things. Like, he could have been in the bathroom. He could have been cheating on his wife with a coworker. I mean, who knows, right? It's also theorized that he was seen with a Coke, and his drink of choice was Dr. Pepper. And so some say that he went to the vending machine and he got a Coke out by accident because he was so nervous about just having shot the president and potentially being caught that he grabbed a Coke instead of a Dr. Pepper. Maybe they were out of Dr. Pepper. I don't know. That's just me like speculating. But maybe he was just feeling Coke that day. I'm a Dr. Pepper person too, but sometimes I just like a good Pepsi. I'd never go for a Coke, but I'm just saying, it could, who cares that he got a Coke instead of Dr. Pepper? The timing doesn't necessarily add up. And also, if he was pooping, we know how guys love to poop forever, then maybe he was just in the bathroom for a really long time and he missed the whole thing. He missed that the president was assassinated. He missed that he was missing because he didn't even know that he was supposed to be somewhere. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there now. But Oswald wasn't seen firing a rifle. So we talked about this a little bit as well. So the home videos didn't have anybody in the windows that he supposedly shot from. Neither at the time the motorcade was supposed to pass, nor at the time that it actually passed. And the only eyewitness who claimed to have seen Oswald shoot the rifle was so wrong about the way it happened that he couldn't have actually seen anything. So this witness, Howard Brennan, said he saw Oswald standing up when firing, but the window was only half open, which would have required the gunman to be either kneeling or crouched down because the window was not broken, so it was not shot through. You had to have shot through the open window. But, Oswald was short, but he wasn't that short, right? And then Brennan said that he saw the gunman's pants, but Brennan was on the street when he apparently saw this gunman in the 6-story window. So you're looking up 60 feet. You see this man's pants. You must have really good vision. Because, like, you can tell that the gunman's standing up and you can see their pants and you know that it's Oswald. But Brennan couldn't pick Oswald out of a lineup. So even though his picture had been like all over the news and everyone was talking about Lee Harvey Oswald, Brennan still didn't pick him out of a lineup. After he supposedly saw him in the 6-story window shooting a gun standing up and saw his pants. Seems a little sketchy to me. There were 2 other witnesses to a man holding a rifle on the 6th floor, but neither of these witnesses described someone who even closely resembled Oswald. So, I don't know. It must not have been him. I don't know. Wasn't even close. The FBI and the Warren Commission had a hard time trying to make the 3-bullet theory stick, which was another thing they had to prove, right? Because Oswald, there was 3 gun casings or bullet casings at the crime scene. Oswald took 3 shots. That was the theory. Well, no matter how you look at it, it doesn't really make sense that only 3 bullets were used. And then they had to modify how the 3-bullet theory would work 3 different times. So initially, the FBI report stated that one of the bullets caused all of Governor Connolly's wounds. So this bullet passed through his torso, shattered his right wrist. Then another bullet caused Kennedy's fatal head wound, and the last bullet, obviously not in this order, caused all of Kennedy's non-fatal wounds. So this bullet would have had to enter his back, and they don't really talk about Kennedy's neck wound. Basically, it had to cause it, but they didn't talk about how it would cause it. Then the Warren Commission came out and said that the bullet that caused the back wound on Kennedy also caused the neck wound. So that was the second, this is how it happened. This is the second way it had to have happened. Like, sorry, we were wrong. Then they came back for a third time. They're like, oh, we were really wrong. Because in June of 1964, it became public that a bystander was also injured in the shooting. So they're like, oh, crap. Okay, 3 bullets. How does this work? So then they came up with this. 1 bullet caused the bystander's wound. Cool. Done. 1 bullet caused the head wound on Kennedy. Awesome. That's 2 bullets. You got 1 bullet left. Here's the deal. This is crazy. The last bullet had to have caused all of Kennedy's and Connolly's non-fatal wounds. So this bullet, it was a busy bullet. It had a mind of its own. It was just doing its own thing. So it entered Kennedy's back and then exited through his throat. Then entered Connolly's back, exited out his chest while passing through his right wrist and lodging itself in his left thigh. But I guess we won't talk about the pathway of that bullet. It was just doing its own thing. Doesn't make any sense. But that's what they came up with. They're like, yep, 3 bullets. It makes it look 3. 1, 2, 3. We can count. So anyway, obviously the Warren Commission did their job. In a way they did their job. In a way they did, because they did not prove, but they found a way to make the answer fit that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter. However, they did not actually convince anybody that that's the truth. I can't say that. They probably convinced people. They just didn't convince people that know how to think for themselves. But let's get into the theories, because there's so many conspiracy theories behind what actually happened that day. We can prove all day that, the evidence isn't adding up in the way that they want it to. But we're going to start with the grassy knoll theory. Obviously, there are people watching from the grassy knoll. They're watching the motorcade pass. Several of them said that they felt like bullets were coming over their head, right? But again, shots, it can be deceiving where they're coming from. So we're going to take that with a grain of salt. I don't like to debunk theories, but I'll I'll toss the bone to that, right? Bill Newman was one of the closest people to the shooting outside of the police and the people in the car. So the bullet that hit Kennedy's head hit directly in front of Newman. Newman was there with his wife and 2 kids watching as Kennedy passed that day. And Newman thought the first 2 shots were fireworks, but then as the car got closer, he could tell there was blood on Connolly's shirt, and then the fatal shot rang out. And that's when he was like, "Oh crap, like there's a shooting happening," right? So, but Newman felt like the shots were coming over his head from behind him, from on the knoll, because he was standing kind of at the bottom of the knoll. But he's not the only one, because Cheryl McKinnon was also on the grassy knoll that day, and McKinnon was a journalism student at the time, and later she wrote for the San Diego Star, quote, "The only thing that I'm absolutely sure of today is that at least 2 of the shots fired that day at Dealey Plaza came from behind where I stood on the knoll, not from the book depository," end quote. And then she continued, quote, "Puffs of white smoke still hung in the air in small patches," end quote. Which would be like, it doesn't make sense that like random puffs of smoke are in the air if all the shots came from the depository. It makes sense that the shots must have come from somewhere close. If you're on the grassy knoll and there's smoke above you, maybe the shots came from around you. At the top of the grassy knoll, because it's kind of like a hill, there was this fence, and on the backside of the fence is like a railroad. It's like a railway station. And there was like a parking lot and all this. It is possible that a gunman was behind the fence because you have visibility and you have the coverage of the fence. About 50 yards behind the fence was the railroad switching tower, and Lee Bowers was in the switching tower at the time. So Bowers had a really nice view of the parking lot that was directly behind the fence, and he told investigators that he saw 2 men standing behind the fence at the time of the assassination. Bowers is quoted saying, "A commotion, a flash of light a flash of light or smoke or something, which caused me to feel like something was out of the ordinary had occurred there." So he's looking out and he's like, "What the heck? There's these 2 guys over there just like hanging out by the fence. That's odd." And then you have this railway supervisor, Skinny Holland, who was on the overpass just ahead of where Kennedy was shot. And he recalled hearing 4 or 5 shots, but he said the sound was different on the third shot. Which, if you shoot guns or have ever been around them, then you can tell there's like a difference between the sounds that come from different guns. I'm not good enough at identifying like the type of gun it is from the shot, but I would know that it was different. Like if you shoot a 9mm, then you shoot a 22, they're different sounds. Like different for sure. Holland said that he also saw the smoke at the top of the grassy knoll, and he would have like a pretty good view because he was overlooking the whole thing. And the other people that were on the overpass also saw the smoke. He suggested that the smoke came from a rifle blast and said, quote, "It wasn't as loud as the first 2. It came from my left, from behind a picket fence, and there was a puff of smoke that kind of lingered out under that green tree, right out from that picket fence, about 8 or 9 feet tall, or feet off the ground, excuse me," end quote. So as the motorcade was speeding away, several people and Secret Service agents ran towards the fence looking for who shot the president, because that was their initial like feeling that that's where the shots came from, was behind the fence or towards the fence, like the grassy knoll area. So people took off towards that area to find who shot the president. Holland had run from the overpass to behind the fence to see who had shot the president as well. And no one was there when he got there, but there were a bunch of footprints and cigarette butts all over the ground. So it had rained that morning, so the footprints kind of like stuck in the mud. By the time the motorcade was passing, it was sunny and beautiful and it had all cleared up. But that morning it had rained, so you could see the footprints. And the footprints actually looked as if someone was pacing, like back and forth, back and forth. And there was a bumper of a nearby car that had mud on it, and the fence support beams also had mud on them, as if someone was climbing on them. So Obviously, somebody had been there. The sheriff, Bill Decker, called over the radio for men to go and investigate what happened in the railroad yards, which was the parking lot behind the fence, to determine what happened. He said, quote, hold everything secure until the homicide and other investigators can get there, end quote. Because, like I said, everyone initially had the thought that that's where the shots had come from. In a book by Josiah Thompson, 6 Seconds in Dallas, he explains that he believes there were 3 shooters. So that there was one on the grassy knoll, which we obviously just talked about. There was somebody in the Texas School Book Depository, and there was one in the Dallas County Records Building. And the County Records Building was kind of like catty corner from the depository, and it would have also had a pretty good vantage point for a shot. So he says he thinks somebody was on the top, like the roof of it, because the shot that hit Connolly came from like a 27-degree angle, and that building makes the most sense for that shot to have come from. The next theory we have is the Umbrella Man theory. So there was a man, Louis Stephen Witt, and he was standing on the grassy knoll next to the Stimmons sign on the side of the road, and he had an umbrella. He had an open umbrella, so he was holding an umbrella over his head. Many people question why someone would have an umbrella on a sunny day, but as we just talked about, it was raining that morning, so having an umbrella makes total sense. That doesn't explain why he had it open at the time. Like maybe he just didn't want to be in the sun. I don't know, but he had an umbrella. On the Zapruder film, he is seen raising the umbrella up and down. So it is theorized that this is him giving a signal to the shooter or shooters, whether there's 1 or 2 or like 4, I don't know, as the car drove by to take your shot. Like he was signaling, take your shot. There is another theory about this umbrella man as well, that there was a poison dart in the umbrella and that he fired the dart at Kennedy through the umbrella as they were going by. That to me doesn't make a lot of sense because nobody actually found a poison dart anywhere. Like the evidence doesn't prove that there was a poison dart. He could have been signaling somebody by moving his umbrella up and down. That seems like an odd thing to do. Unless you're cheering. But it didn't seem like he was cheering. The next theory is that it was a mob hit. So I talked about the 1960 election in my voter fraud episode, if you've listened to that. The election between Kennedy and Nixon, it was super close. And we talked about this last week as well. But the vote came down to 2 states, Illinois and Texas. In Illinois, Kennedy won the election by only 9,000 votes. So it was pretty slim. But at the time, there were rumors that the Chicago mayor stuffed the ballot boxes to allow Kennedy to win. It could have been organized crime that helped pad the election in Kennedy's favor in Illinois. Not 100%, but it doesn't seem like the Kennedys were strangers to getting help from the mob, potentially. Kennedy was supposed to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba. So the mafia-run casinos, basically, if Fidel Castro was overthrown, they could get back up and running. Well, we all know that Kennedy did not have much success in his dealings with Cuba on any front, actually. And so that maybe the mob killed him for not like holding up his end of the deal after they got him the election. We also see Robert Kennedy, who was the attorney general at the time, cracking down on the mob and pursuing a case against Jimmy Hoffa. And Robert Kennedy felt that because he went after the mob, he might have got his brother killed. So, potential. I mean, I think that was Bobby Kennedy's like first initial reaction was like, I got my brother killed because of the mob. I don't know if that's what he believed until his death, but that was his initial reaction to when he found out that Jack died. Then we have the theories, multiple theories, that the government was involved. And this comes from, like, there's lots here. And this is why we covered LBJ, because we're going to get into that. So, first off, many speculate that the CIA was the one behind the shooting of JFK. I mean, I don't want to say that we're wrong in thinking that, or that we're not wrong, because I don't want to be the next target of the CIA. I don't think I would be. But anyway, so JFK was a risk, basically. He was talking about exposing some secret societies that are running the government from behind the curtain. He also like couldn't really be controlled. Not like he couldn't be controlled the way others could be controlled, because his parent or his family had money and influence. They had connections. Like his family was just well connected, and they had money. Like that's how you control people, right? Is money or connections, giving people what they want. But Kennedy, like the Kennedys had a way of getting what they wanted, so they didn't really need like the secret societies. And if he's going to expose the secret societies, they're not going to allow that. With this theory, some think maybe Oswald was on the CIA's payroll. So, with this idea, Oswald was just pretending to be a communist to infiltrate communist groups for America, and was spying on the Soviet Union while he was there. Which is why, after he defected to the Soviet Union, America just kind of like let him back in after he was all done with whatever he was doing over there. I don't know. That part of the theory seems a little far fetched to me. I think that maybe Oswald was just a patsy. It's unclear. But the CIA for sure could have been involved. But what if Lyndon B. Johnson was in on the assassination? So there was a man. He was a businessman and a con man. His name was Billy Celestes. And he was running schemes in Texas that involved like phony financial statements and non existent fertilizer tanks and like cotton allotments and like all kinds of crazy things, like big, big schemes. He was stealing lots of money from lots of people. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture was potentially in on it. There was all kinds of things going on. Not great. In 1962, Estes came under fire for all that, and it was found that he potentially had links to Johnson. Actually, I don't think it was found right away. I think they were trying to figure out if he had links to Johnson. Robert Kennedy, who was not a fan of Lyndon Johnson, was aggressively investigating and like aggressively pushing his people to continue to investigate to try to get at the bottom of this, hoping that Johnson was at the bottom of it and that he could nail him, basically. Estes was supposed to go on trial for all these schemes, but it was postponed because the feds were indicting him. So by the time the trial actually started for Estes, Kennedy had already been assassinated, and Johnson used his power as the president to keep their relationship under wraps. So any relationship between Johnson and Estes was no more, basically, after that. Had Johnson's association with Estes been revealed, he could have gone to prison for his involvement with whatever Billy Estes was doing. And it's possible that Kennedy would have dropped Johnson as his running mate for the 64 election due to this scandal. So Johnson had a lot on the line. And as we learned in the Johnson episode, he and his friend / lawyer, Edward Clark, knew that Johnson couldn't handle scandals associated with his name. Like, no more scandals could be associated with his name. So they needed to clean up the mess. In 1961, so we're kind of backtracking a little bit, Henry Marshall who was like an agricultural department official, was investigating Estes, and he was found dead. Marshall's death was quickly ruled a suicide from the local sheriff, who happened to potentially also be on the payroll of Johnson / Clark. But Marshall's death being ruled a suicide doesn't make a lot of sense because he had 5 bullet wounds. Estes testified that he testified like after Johnson's death, that Johnson ordered the hit because Marshall was going to expose Estes' dealings and ties to Johnson. So Johnson was like, yep, get rid of that guy. And it's speculated that Mac Wallace killed Henry Marshall. If you don't remember Mac Wallace from the Johnson episode, he is like the hitman for Edward Clark and Lyndon Johnson. So Due to the investigation and the fact that Kennedy might not have run with Johnson in the 64 election, Edward Clark might have set up the assassination because it benefits Clark if Johnson's the president of the United States, obviously. First and foremost, they are in Johnson's hometown or home state, excuse me. Like, this is their playing field. You're just in their garden. Also, Clark had ties to everyone in Texas. Like, he was basically running Texas. And we also have Mac Wallace's fingerprints on the rifle found in the depository. That just seems way too convenient. Obviously, that didn't come out until the 90s, but it's still there. So maybe Lyndon Johnson did it. And if President Kennedy is assassinated, he becomes the president. So that's like a win-win. Some believe that the U.S. military-industrial complex did it, which this theory is based on the fact that Kennedy wanted to figure out a way for us to get out of the Vietnam conflict, but the military wanted to increase involvement, which actually makes sense for them because war means more money. Author, professor, and former Canadian civil servant Peter Dale Scott has indicated that Kennedy's death allowed for policy reversals desired by the secret government to escalate the U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. And just so you know, Mac Wallace was eventually hired by a company in the U.S. military industrial complex and ran that company for a little while after he got out of jail. So, who knows what's going on? Everything's so connected. I feel like I have like one of those boards with all the lines and all the pictures, you know? Anyway, I'm over here just being crazy. Like, I don't know what's going on. Everything's connected. Nothing makes sense. The last government involvement theory is that the Illuminati did it, which, if you've paid attention, every single government involvement theory has something to do with like the secret government. So that seems to be tracking. Anyway, so basically, Kennedy delegated presidential power to issue silver certificates to the Treasury. This threatened the power of the Federal Reserve, which is controlled by the Illuminati. So maybe the Illuminati just got rid of him because they're like, nope, money is power. We control the money. We have all the power. Seems like Kennedy was a huge threat to the Illuminati on basically every front. There are a bunch of other theories that I included here, but I don't have a whole lot of information on them. And just because I have these theories, I mean, some of them can go together. Like the grassy knoll theory and like any of these other theories could go together. Like just because it doesn't have to be Lee Harvey Oswald that did it. However they did it. It could be in any way. There was a theory that there's a Secret Service agent and he had this rifle. The theory is that he accidentally shot the rifle. I think that this theory doesn't really hold that much water because it doesn't account for all the shots and then also like the timing of the shots. So if he accidentally would like pulled his rifle trigger like boom boom boom, you know, which makes sense. Like if he slipped, then again like the shots would have been in quick succession. But if he just like slipped and accidentally pulled the trigger once, that doesn't account for all the shots that were fired. There's another theory that there was someone in the storm drain and that they shot the president from there, but the angles don't really work out for that theory. So again, I don't think that one really holds much water, but I wanted to include it so you guys had all the theories. There is a theory that Ted Cruz's father was involved. So of course, like during the 2016 presidential election, there were so many theories, like just conspiracy theories out there about Ted Cruz. People were accusing him of being the Zodiac killer. So, like, I don't know. He's got lots of theories going on. Trump accused Rafael Cruz of knowing and being with Oswald prior to the shooting of JFK. Trump refers to the National Enquirer for having a picture of Raphael Cruz and Lee Harvey Oswald having breakfast together. I mean, maybe he was one of the shooters. I don't know. Maybe it was Lee Harvey Oswald, but he wasn't a lone shooter and he had accomplices. Who knows? There's another theory that Woody Harrelson's dad was the shooter or one of the shooters. So Charles Harrelson was accused of being one of two gunmen on the grassy knoll. So he was in the military and then he worked for the CIA and then he also worked for the mob after that. And he confessed to the murder of JFK. There are also photos of him at the site that day. You can look it up and see Charles Harrelson there the day that JFK died. Harrelson is from Texas, and he was arrested just a couple years later in 1968 for murdering a businessman in a contract hit in South Texas. And then he died in a maximum security prison for killing a federal judge. Dude was a hitman, like legit hitman. So this has a little bit of weight to it. I mean, there's not like a whole lot of evidence because it's kind of hard. Now he's dead. But apparently, Woody Harrelson told Robert Kennedy Jr. everything that Charles Harrison, his dad, had told him. And it seems like Robert Kennedy Jr. believes Woody Harrelson's story. I mean, again, this could go along with like the CIA theory. This go along with obviously the grassy knoll theory. It goes along with all kinds of different theories. This is just like one of the potential hitmen that were there that day. But anyway, there is a black dog man theory. So author Robert Groden argues that the black dog man figure was seen near a bush in frame 413 of the Zapruder film. Wow, that was hard for me to say. It's unclear whether this man is in front or behind the bush, but many argue that the man was just a groundskeeper. I don't know. He could have been a gunman dressed up as a groundskeeper, because then you have a better vantage point. But who knows, like, how many gunmen were actually there that day? Like, I don't know. Could there have been, like, 6, 7, 8? Like, backup gunmen? Who knows? The last theory, which I think is my favorite theory, is that the aliens did it. So Project Luna was a secret alien base on the dark side of the moon. And these aliens supplied a gas pressure device to the driver of the presidential limo to kill Kennedy. They did this because Kennedy was going to expose the Washington alien collusion. So, yeah, that's gotta be the one. Anyway, that's all the theories I could find. That's everything I could find on JFK. But I knew it was gonna be a lot. So, and that's why I broke it up into 2 episodes. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I would love to hear which theory you believe and what you think actually happened that day. I think there's just so many things that you do have to get kind of like the string board and start connecting the dots in weird different places. But of course, until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Valaha, for our awesome intro.